This is the PlayStation Portable. They made around 80 million units of this device, and they were very, very popular. So we now have a successor to this, well, in maybe just name alone, which is the PSP, or the PlayStation Portal, which is the new device we're talking about today. It's oddly shaped, it does things very well, but then also a lot of things wrong. So this is the device we're talking about today. This is the PlayStation Portal. Now, we normally talk about regular handhelds on this channel, but I think this is in the same form factor and what I'd like to talk about today because it gets a lot of gaming done, but in a very specific way. It's got a fantastic 8-inch screen and it's meant to play your games from your PlayStation 5, but that's it. Let's dive into the hardware. And this hardware is very nice. On the front, right pork chop, we have the X, circle, box, and triangle buttons that are squishy and not clicky. Up at the top of the right pork chop, we have a hamburger menu, which is the usual start select button, which is clicky and not squishy. To the left of that, we have a microphone mute button that is squishy and not clicky. Then last thing on the front right is we have a joystick, which these joysticks are interesting because they're a hair smaller than the regular DualSense PS5 controllers, but feel exactly the same. Now they do sit on this weird little pedestal here, which it looks like a big volcano, but it works really well. And once you get over how it looks, it just kind of fades into the device and you forget about it. And I actually like that the screen is kind of recessed a little bit because then you're not putting your fingers on the screen and it keeps the device a little bit cleaner. Moving over to the left pork chop, we have a D-pad that is squishy and not clicky. Up from there, we have a share button that is clicky and not squishy. And to the right of that, we have the PlayStation logo button, which is, you guessed it, the PlayStation menu button. In addition to another volcano stick that is clicky and not squishy. And in the center of the device, we have an 8-inch 1080p 60 screen, which looks fantastic. And with this screen combo, you really wouldn't want any more for a device like this. Any more hertz and they would just be wasted. We have a microphone hole on the bottom of the device, on the bottom of the screen, and right under the bottom is kind of the extra space between the screen and the little swoop that goes between the two pork chops. That houses a USB-C connection and a 3.5mm headphone jack. And why it doesn't look like a USB-C port is because I have a dongle for my MagTame magnetic charger in here. They're pretty cool and they make way better cables than the little USB-C cables that the Sony PlayStation comes with. So check those out in the description if you like those. Moving to the top of the device, this is where you can tell that Sony has put a lot of engineering into this device. All of the bezels and plastic cutoffs feel fantastic. And everything is very flowing. Nothing is really square or rigid on this device. Volume up and down buttons that are clicky and not squishy. A Sony branded logo right over a mic hole, a connect button that is clicky and not squishy, and then a power button that is also clicky and not squishy. The last two ports we have on the top are two speaker ports, which they face directly up, and they sound incredible, but they're facing the wrong way, so you never really get the full effect of these speakers, even though they sound fantastic. But let's not forget about one of the standout features here, which are the triggers. The L1 and R1 buttons are clicky and not squishy, but then we have the L2 and R2 triggers, which are the adaptive triggers, and they are able to change their resistance. They really make a big difference on making this feel different. Finally, we have the texture. The texture on this is actually made up of tiny PlayStation logos. You can't actually see it when you look at it directly, but when you look at it through a macro lens, you can see that it's awesome, and it provides a lot of grip compared to the front smooth portion of the device. So this thing is very cool to me because if I already have a PlayStation 5 controller and I'm looking for the occasional second controller, this thing has all the functionality of a regular controller, in addition to also having an 8-inch screen glued to the center. So, with the hardware being on absolute point, where's the drawbacks? Because for $200, this thing better be able to do a lot, and it kind of does. Let's look at the software. And here's where the value proposition kind of drops a hair, because this thing really only plays PS5 games that you already own or games from PlayStation. That's it. There's no other way to sideload anything or do anything else on this currently, and you wouldn't really want to because there's no way to put a micro SD card in here or do anything like that. But what it does do well is stream PlayStation games. So the first things first is you want to be able to have your PlayStation on standby if you want to use this thing without interacting with your PlayStation. If it's off, you're kind of out of luck. You can't send a wake signal to it if it's off. But if it's on standby, you can send a wake signal to standby. So all you have to do is power on the device. It prompts you to whatever PS5 is connected to your network, which was very easy. You just clicked it on, it saw the PlayStations on the network, and then it immediately connected to it. It'll connect your profile with itself, and then it'll basically just turn on your PlayStation and stream the game from there. Now, I noticed it did not send a wake signal to your TV, so if you're worried about that, turning on your TV and playing while you're away, it doesn't do that, so that's nice. So I actually went through and tested a few different games because this thing is a small screen, and it comes with the regular downsides of other consoles. So if you're looking to play like AAA titles at the max, you can do that, but you're going to be looking at something that has a smaller screen. So some of the text may look a little small. So if you have bad eyesight, you may want to stick to something that it's big visuals, something like Astro's Playroom or the new Astrobot game. All of that plays incredibly well on this device. I also picked a few other games that I thought would do really well on this device. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge looks fantastic on this device, in addition to things like the Little Big Planet games, and there's an absolute slew of different games if you have PlayStation Plus that you can stream, don't have on your device, in addition to playing what you do have downloaded as well. These are my personal favorites to play on this type of device, but you can play stuff like God of War and those AAA titles, and they do look really good, but this is going to be more taxing on your router, so if you don't have a fantastic router, you may want to stick to simpler games. But this is the general idea for the software. There's really not much else on here. There's a slight menu where you can adjust the brightness and volume, but that's about it. So the big thing for me is the device is lacking feature for that $200 mark for an Android tablet. But if we compare this to the DualSense controller and try and think of how this is being introduced as an ecosystem, this is a thing that's not meant to play games other than stuff you already have on your PS5. So for $200, what do you get? And if you're trying to make that price comparison, if you're just trying to get a controller, just get the controller. But if you're looking for a little bit of added feature in addition to a controller, well, the controller's baseline from Sony are $70. So then, what are we getting here hardware-wise? Well, we're getting basically the Logitech G Cloud that can't do anything else other than stream games from one console, which is okay. Logitech Cloud launched for $300. If you're looking for a device that is just game streaming, go get that one. So for the price point, when you compare this to the DualSense controller, it actually makes a lot of sense, at least to me, because you're getting a screen in addition to Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, headphones, all that stuff, speakers, all that jazz, extra batteries, and the DualSense controller. So realistically, you're paying $130 for a tiny TV setup. That's really what you should think of this as. This is not a dedicated streaming device in the sense of a Logitech G Cloud would be. But that does enter that into that market of types of things that do that. So what should we compare it to then? And this is where we start comparing the PlayStation Portal to other streaming devices, like we said before, like the Logitech G Cloud, or the thing you have in your pocket already, your phone, which has good connectivity, probably a half-decent screen, and it's not that large when you add a controller to it. So you're like 70% of the way there from a decent streaming option. But then when you compare it to other stuff like the Logitech G Cloud, well, that feels a little bit different because it's not a dedicated device with the same feel and hardware. So for playing Xbox games, you could play Xbox games on a potato nowadays, so it feels totally fine. But Sony's cultivated this whole thing with their ecosystem. They've got their headphones, their specific controllers, but when you're in the ecosystem, it's kind of like how Apple does their stuff. They make everything out of aluminum, they make it metal, and they make it a little more expensive, but it all fits and works together with all the other stuff you own. So if you're in the Sony ecosystem for hardware, this is a no-brainer, and you're looking for an extra controller. This is the thing I think you should pick up. Because if you have one good controller already and you're only looking for maybe a second controller, maybe 10% of the time, this thing's a no-brainer. It's a cool thing to have when you get kicked off the TV. Now, one thing you do have to think about is your router. If you have your base router you got from your Verizon hookup or whoever you got, it's not going to do the trick. You definitely need an upgraded decent router with at least Wi-Fi 6E, a 5 gigahertz band, and something that's half decent, because if it's not decent, then your streaming quality is terrible. And you can even tell when you're pretty far away from your 5G band, it also lags and does a bunch of stuff too. But when you're pretty close, it's very good. It's imperceptible how quickly they can get the signal back and forth between the device and the handheld. It's awesome. I really like it. But if you're looking for anything else, maybe you're not looking for a streaming console just for a PlayStation. Maybe you're looking for a streaming console that does everything, which is the G Cloud we talked about. Or maybe you're looking for something else that plays games just on its own. We've got one of those too. So while I keep burping, check out one of these videos. They're specially tailored for just you and you alone. No one else. That's all I got. I'll talk to you all later.